Helping creators navigate the waters of podcasting. Welcome to the Podcast Cadet Training Series, where we simplify the world of podcasting with techniques and advice from professionals across the podcasting industry. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Podcast Cadet Training Series. I am Chris Jordan, your host, coming to you from Austin, Texas. Our guest today is going to be the amazing SERP guy himself, Jason Barnard of CaliCube.pro. We will be talking about the world of SEO. What is SERP? Things like that. Whenever you hear SEO optimization, how can you do best practices to make sure that amongst the millions of shows on the internet with podcasts attached to them, how do you get found? How do you maintain that discoverability? How do you make your show discoverable? So that is his specialty. That is exactly what they do over at CaliCube.pro. So when we come back from this message, we will be getting into it with Jason Barnard, founder of CaliCube.pro. Have you considered starting a podcast? Looking for a way to make your business a voice of authority in an industry? Then Podcast Cadet is the solution for you. Whether starting a podcast for yourself, your brand, business, school, church, or just plain fun, Podcast Cadet is here to help you navigate the waters of the podcast industry. Specializing in one-on-one consultation and training with industry professionals in fields ranging from podcast technology and editing to distribution, monetization, and even social media strategies, Podcast Cadet tailors their services to the specific needs of you and your podcast. Do you already have a podcast and trying to find ways to engage and grow your audience? Sign up for your Podcast Cadet audit today and let us help you explore new and exciting ways to leverage your content and elevate your podcast brand to whole new levels. From consultational workshops to affordable podcast production and maintenance packages, Podcast Cadet is your one-stop shop for everything podcast related on the internet. Visit podcastcadet.com today to sign up for your consultation or training. That website again is podcastcadet.com. That's right, folks. And while you are online checking that out, make sure to stop on by CaliCube.pro. That is our guest today. You can find out so much more about everything that Jason Barnard is all about, his expertise, his podcast, with Jason Barnard, everything else. Welcome to the show today, Jason. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks a lot for having me. I'm delighted to be here talking about podcasts, how to promote them using SEO techniques on Google and Bing.
Yeah, it is. For a lot of people, Jason, this is one of the most nebulous topics in the world, and I think people really get lost when it comes to SEO. In the world, I think people get lost trying to wade through the world of keywords, which are great, but not necessarily the absolute bee's knees or necessity when it comes to such things, correct?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think kind of from a podcasting point of view, the traffic, the interest, the branding is going to come from somewhere other than Google. The driving force behind podcasts today is not Google, it's not Bing, it's not search, but it is becoming increasingly influenced by search, and search can influence and help us promote our podcast. So I think you need to create your podcast from a creative point of view, using the platforms that you've been traditionally using, and think, how can I package this for Google and for Bing to make sure that I get maximum traction as a bonus from them?
Yeah, precisely, because it really is a lot about what you are serving up on literally the digital platter, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think what is nice about podcasting is that we're not in a situation today where we're thinking, I have to please the search engines first. We're thinking, I need to please my audience first. And that's where the search engines are going. And we need to stick to our guns. We need to make sure that we continue to serve our audience, because the search engines, at the end of the day, are trying to serve their audience. And to do so, they're trying to identify which of us fits in with a particular subsection of their audience. So I need to inform both Google and Bing who I am, what I do, and who my audience might be, so that they can make that fit. So I think sticking to who you are, what you do, and who your audience is from a podcasting point of view is a really great approach. And trying to do pure SEO for podcasts today would be a real pity, because it's about to change.
Yeah. Well, and that's just it. That's what a lot of people don't realize, is that a lot of the times, by the time you've figured out those demographic keywords, things like that, the algorithm changes. That algorithm with Google, Bing, Yandex, all of those indexes, DuckDuckGo, what have you, across the internet, they change almost quarterly. As far as what the AI is picking up, what it's tying together, things like that. So,
sure,
unless you have the time or the money, which is typically my jazz hands moment in my presentation to keep people engaged, because it is about time or money. What do you have? If you have the time and money, yeah, you can pay an SEO or a SERP guy like yourself to come in and specialize things and keep on top of that trend. But if you're a podcaster at home doing this from your garage and you're a single mom, hey, you don't have money to pay a SEO person and to keep up with the nebulous world of ever-changing keywords.
Right. Yes. Now, that you've made multiple great points there. Number one is you suggested that this changes on a quarterly basis. In fact, it changes every single day, every single minute of every single day, because what Google has is big algorithm updates, maybe every month, every quarter. But in between times, the algorithm is evolving on its own. So we have to understand that these updates are the big changes that can make or break a specific brand for a specific query. But in fact, over time, it's evolving constantly. And we need to get into that idea of saying, I'm not going to trick the algorithm. I need to make sure that I am positioned in a manner that Google and Bing understand who I am, what I do, and who my audience is, i.e. what I talk about and who might be interested. Now, when you talk about keywords, my single biggest piece of advice to people is to say, don't spend your whole life looking at SEMrush or SE ranking or another tool like that, trying to figure out what keywords you should be using in your titles. Think about vocabulary. What vocabulary is my audience using? What vocabulary could my audience potentially use to search for something online where I might be a good, helpful solution or answer? So you're looking for the vocabulary and you're looking for understanding from these machines. And the vocabulary will drive you towards people who are searching, who could potentially be your audience, by the fact that they're searching, but more importantly, the fact that these engines understand you will enable them to present you spontaneously through things like Google Discover. If you haven't looked at that, that's going to be a big, big, big deal in podcasting in the years to come. Google Discover is Google pushing towards people what it thinks they will be interested in. And if you think about what I just said, if Google understands who your podcast audience is, they can push your podcast to an audience that you have never seen before and who aren't even actively searching for you. And that is the key to the future, especially as, when you think about it, social media and podcasting platforms do exactly the same thing.
I do not have an applause button for this show, and I should, because that is precisely, we spent 3 panels yesterday. It was like an echo chamber talking about no matter what your show is, start building a community. Start building a community. That network is more valuable for SEO search and everything else than you will possibly know. That network of similar descriptions, similar activities, posting similar articles to similar places, whether it be Twitter, whatever you're on, make sure that your engagement is quality engagement. It's great to have a presence on every social media platform. But literally, if your audience is, hey man, if your audience is like mine, 45 and up, for most shows I have, I'm not going to get a TikTok. You know what I mean? I'm not going to invest the time to creating and curating content, which is what you have to do for specific platforms, is make sure that you are engaging the audience in that specific way. But if you're providing that quality content and it's getting engagements there, it's going to pop up on that Google Discover. If you're a social media user on that platform and you search for things like that on Google, your group's going to pop up in that discoverability area. Stuff like that.
Right, 100%. And what's really interesting, and can you talk about it there, is if I can build a community and my community interacts with me, engages with me, Google potentially sees it through the multiple platforms it has, Gmail, Google Search, Google Podcasts. We forget just how much they are out there, how much they can actually track what we're doing. So if it can look at my audience engaging with me, it will say, I understand the audience, and I understand that this audience appreciates this content from this person or this podcast. Yeah. And therefore, I can confidently recommend, and that's what we're looking for from all these platforms. We're looking for them to recommend us to their users. And you have to remember that these are their users, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Google, Bing, Instagram. We're asking them to promote us and to push us for free to their users. And I would just like to say, before ending this whole kind of section, is our audience is simply a subsection of their audience.
That's right.
Of their users, sorry. So we need to make sure that they understand which subsection of their users is our audience, so that they can actively and confidently promote us to people who will appreciate us.
Yeah. And once again, that cannot be, before we end that section, that cannot be overstated. Whether it comes to your show description, the matching description on your website, on your social media platforms, whatever, that it is that niche definition of what you are that is totally going to make the difference and totally be, like you said, completely be a game changer as far as discoverability coming up in the world of Google, being all these other platforms. And even whenever it comes to monetizing your podcast, that SEO and that niche SEO that you are providing, that's the sale. Forget the actual number of listeners. It's what niche SEO do you control, that whenever you add a hashtag to it, pings back to them and adds them to that. You know?
An absolutely brilliant point, and 100% on board with that, is if I aim for SEO, there are 15 million other SEOs, including people like Neil Patel, who have pretty much nailed that market right now. But if I aim for a niche, I will get more visibility because I'm talking about something that other people are not talking about. If I aim for SEO, I have no chance. It's a big market, but I have no chance of ever being visible. But if I aim for brand SERP, or if I aim for brand SERP SEO or knowledge panel SEO, that's a niche within the SEO industry where there are maybe 15, 20 people competing with me for that space. Now, SEO, 15 million users. brand SERP SEO, 1,000 users. But I'm likely to get in front of those 1,000 users regularly if I focus on that speciality. Whereas with the 15 million, I will never get in front of them, and there is absolutely no point because the big guns have nailed it already.
Yeah, precisely. And that I mean, that is one of the big reasons why whenever I'm teaching people podcasting, it's like, please, even if you're not going to build a URL right now, go buy it. Go buy it. Start controlling your brand now. The sooner you can start pushing content out from that rather than a platform, the sooner you will literally... It's no different than going out in your front lawn, folks, and going, hi, this is my front lawn. You're literally putting your foot on the corner of the internet and going, this is my corner to play on right here.
Yeah, and also, and telling people, remember, when you want to come and talk to me, come and talk to me here on my front lawn. Don't go and talk to me on the front lawn of the local social society where I happen to hang out once a week. Yeah. My lawn is where I will always be, and you can always find exactly what it is I'm talking about. That's and right. You can interact with me directly. And one really important point about getting a domain name, getting your corner of the internet that you own, is that even if today it seems scary trying to create a website that you can control and that you can actually manage because technically it might be difficult, reserving it today will cost you $10, $15 a year to reserve it. And in 5 years' time, that will have cost you $60. And in 5 years' time, then you can start. Yeah. But in the meantime, it's only cost you $60 to reserve that corner. And that corner, if it's incredibly relevant, if you choose incredibly relevant for your podcasting yourself, it will be a natural human reaction to type that into the browser and come straight to your lawn, as you said earlier on. So that $60, I would argue, is well invested.
Oh, absolutely. It's literally the best investment that you can make. Like I said, whether you start a website today, whether you start it 10 episodes in, whether you start it 5 years from now, it's the fact that you are building that niche SEO. And as you build that, anything related to that is going up in value. And when you go to buy that domain later, somebody may have already purchased it in hopes that, hey, eventually they're going to want a website. Guess who owns the .com? Or somebody's going to just piggyback off content, what have you, or turn it into something totally different. And now your SEO that you've been working on is tied to like a plumbing company somewhere,
Right. No, 100%. And the thing is, now there are a few things to bear in mind here is don't waste money reserving 1,000 domain names that might potentially be used by your competition. We're not in a situation like Google where we need to protect our brand name across all these different, what we call TLDs, top-level domains. So you can have a .com. .com is great because that's where people go to straight off the bat. Yep. So if you've got something incredibly relevant with a .com, go for it, take it, reserve it now. But then you also have .info, .live, .expert, .show, .club. All of these are possible alternatives. If you're not in the US, then you've got .fr if you're in France, .co.uk. There are all sorts of possibilities. So don't get frustrated by the fact that your best favorite domain .com is taken, because the internet up until 4 or 5 years ago was very much .com focused and is increasingly occupied by different TLDs, i.e. instead of having .com, you could have .me if your podcast is yourself. If the podcast is named after you, .me is a great idea.
Yeah, I've got Chris Jordan.ninja.
Yeah, that makes you sound really smart.
.ninja address. When I heard about that, I was like, "Yep, that's my personal resume website right there. That's my personal resume." If you wanted to see my AV samples, things like that, that's where you go to do it.
Brilliant. And one thing is kind of CaliCube. When I started CaliCube, the domain name CaliCube.com was taken. And I got CaliCube.pro instead. And I communicated with the domain gullycube.pro and everything. And in fact, nobody ever went to the gullycube.com.
Yeah.
That belonged to somebody else, because I communicated using the domain name as part of my communication.
Yeah.
And the other interesting point that I think we should remember is, or it might be useful to some people, is gullycube.com. They offered me that for $16,000.
Yep.
Right at the start when I launched my company. And over 5 years, that price came down from $16,000 to $1,000.
Wow.
And I recently bought it for $1,000, which is a lot of money. But I wanted to do an experiment, and I've done that experiment, and I'm very pleased that I've done it. But what I mean is, people, when they think you need it, will try to get as much money out of you as they can.
Yes.
And if you stick to your guns, over time, that price will probably come down, and you might be able to buy that .com in 5 years' time for a lot less money.
I've got my .com story years and years ago, and I mean like years ago, like everything was still being done in Adobe Flash. Like if you had Adobe Flash on your site, you were the bomb. You know, this was easily 1999.
Oh, right. Well, in that case, I was the bomb, because my site's for Adobe Flash.
Yeah.
And we got 5 million visits a month to the site.
Yeah.
So that's the bomb. Brilliant.
Exactly. And it was the age of people just buying domains for pennies, things like that. And I owned hcproductions.com. It was for putting my music out, my poetry, things like that. And was supposed to build a website, didn't really have the money to do it. My buddy who was hosting the name for me was like, hey, need to find out what you want to do with this name, everything else. Payments coming to us, like, listen, I can't do anything with it. Just do whatever. And he sold it. Many years later, I went to go buy my domain. hcproductions.com was taken. And when I looked it up, I mean, I'm now hcproductions.org, have been since. It was one of the only domains around available at that point. So I took it because I do work with nonprofits, that kind of stuff. Anyway, it was wild because I have now seen my .com. Every once in a while I Google it, and it's available now, and now it's moved down to like, I think it's $2,200. But at one point it was $14,000. My .com was valued at $14,000, and it went through an evolution of being like an extreme sports videography company in Vegas that shot like motocross. It went through so many different permutations of companies called HC Productions.
Right. Well, I think one really important thing there to say is that it's not the domain name in and of itself that has value. It's the content that's behind it.
That's right.
And if I'm pushing GullyCube as a content-filled concept and nobody else is using GullyCube, the person who owns GullyCube.com has no real use for it.
Yeah.
And therefore would just want to take the money they can get. And in terms of podcasts, I mean, if you want a relatively easy way in, you can have .show or .radio. Those are great opportunities for podcasters.
Yeah. And if your show incorporates video, you can always go with the .tv address.
Brilliant.
Things like that, because it really is. It's once again, it's that unique domain that you're looking for, and when it comes to that, when it comes to the uniqueness of your name, your niche, your show itself, where does that come into play as far as discoverability, being able to be found amongst the literal millions of fish in the ocean of podcasting now?
Well, I mean, the other thing is that your domain name, I mean, in terms of Google, please do remember that keywords in your domain name make absolutely no difference. There is no point in buying a domain name that has keywords in it. For example, bestbusinesspodcast.com is completely without value in terms of adding any kind of ranking value to your podcast in Google. But what is really important is having a unique name, because at that point, people search for you. They will immediately find you on Google. If somebody searches for GullyCube, Calicube, my company, will always come up because it's a unique name.
Yep.
Jason Barnard is less of a unique name. And yeah, I still come up, I still manage to dominate. But if I didn't, if I was called, I have a friend called Simon Cox. Simon Cox, COX, is a very common name in the UK, probably in the US as well. If I search for Simon Cox and then don't find him, I find the cricketer or the politician or somebody else who has the same name, I will then say Simon Cox, SEO. I will add a qualifier word. Once somebody is searching for your brand name, they will either find you immediately because you've dominated that particular name on Google, or they will add a qualifier and find you anyway. So the domain name in and of itself should represent you and not be an attempt to cheat these machines, because they don't get cheated by anything that simple anymore.
No. I mean, back in the day, you could, literally load every page with keywords and white text at the bottom of your page, and it would help you rank. It's been amazing, even as somebody who works in the technology industry and is normally the guy putting microphones on people like you at shows, and taking your PowerPoints, that kind of stuff. And to see where things have grown AI-wise as far as Google, that kind of stuff, as far as searching on the internet, it is, like you're saying, become inordinately organic. And the more niche you can make your name, the more of that niche SEO you can control, the higher discoverability you'll have, with or without listenership.
Right. Yeah, 100%. And the other thing is the search engines are trying, and successfully trying, they're doing a very good job of it, of saying, we want to present more helpful information to our users before our users have even asked for it. And that requires an understanding of the different elements they could propose. So, for example, I'm interested in chess. There must be chess podcasts. I can't imagine how boring that might be. And I do apologize to anybody who happens to have a chess podcast. But if Google knows that I'm interested in chess, it can potentially offer to me in a search that is related chess podcasts as a possible, what Bill Slawski calls teachable moments. Google's saying, here's something I can help you with. I can teach you by sending you to this great resource that will be interesting to you and will help you move forward in your learning experience. That's number one, and that's when I'm actually just on Google searching. Number two is I boot up my Android Google phone. I swipe right. It shows me the latest news, the latest things it thinks I might be interested in.
Yeah.
And the other day I was in the south of France, I live in France, and it said, why don't you go and see a film with Brigitte Bardot? Because I was in a town where there happened to be a film about Brigitte Bardot being shown.
Wow.
And that's to do with the fact that I often go to the cinema and the fact I was in this town. So Google's pushing this content towards me. If I had been in London and I'd been searching for chess games for the 5 or 6 days previously, and there was a chess tournament going on in London, that Discover would have said, why don't you go to the chess tournament? Maybe you want to listen to this incredibly interesting chess podcast. That's where the secret, that's where we're coming from, or that's where we're going to, rather.
Yeah, precisely. And I mean,
and there are chess podcasts.
Oh, yeah, there's plenty. There's a list of the top 15 chess podcasts, bud.
Oh, my Lord, I don't want to listen to those.
Riveting content, I'm sure. But I've even had examples.
Just to defend myself, in fact, I was a big chess player when I was younger, and I was actually very good. I was North England champion at one point, and I stopped because it drives you totally insane. You get this complete obsession with these incredibly useless bits and pieces, and people like Bobby Fischer, who did go totally nuts.
Yeah.
I understand why. So it's not that I find it boring, it's that I'm frightened if I get into it again, I'll find it too interesting, and then I'll never get out again.
Yeah, and a lot of people, my little cousin, understands me probably more than anybody else in that realm. And I remember at one point, one of our cousins was like, "Hey, yeah, you should." Oh God, what was the game that everybody was into? It was Beyond Doom and stuff like that, but she was like, "You should get into this game. You would enjoy it." And I was like, "Ricky, take it, man." He's like, No, Chris can't do that. Chris would get nothing done in the world if he got back into gaming. Like, you don't understand how much time Chris played Doom and Wolfenstein and things like that. Like, yeah, I literally made the promise to myself that whenever I built a computer again, that I would never have a game on it. Ever.
Right.
Because it was just a vapid time suck in my life. Not that I didn't love it and enjoy it.
I can relate to that a great deal. But one other thing is, what I do find is, I mean, I don't listen to very many podcasts because I don't have travel time to work, because I have always worked from home.
Yeah. And
I was talking to John Mueller from Google, who says he listens to a podcast every single day on his bike riding to work. And I think from that perspective, podcasts is something that I had underestimated. But in fact, we're incredibly interested in this podcast. I mean, I've got a friend, Hugo, who was in the band with me years ago, and that's a completely new story, different story. I spoke to him yesterday, and we were talking about cooking. And we both agreed one of the best skills we both learned was how to cook. And he said, I love being in the kitchen, cooking a meal, listening to a podcast.
Yep.
And I think we forget that there are these moments in people's lives when you need to do something else, but you can listen to a podcast, cooking, driving, riding to work on your bike, in the train. And perhaps even there are some people who actually listen to podcasts staring at a blank wall. Can't imagine who that might be, but
people riding in subways, buses, that kind of stuff. And that's something that I try to explain to people, is that as opposed to a normal radio show and somebody who comes from broadcast, they have been chasing our coattails. If you notice now, there is not a radio show out there that you listen to that's not like, when we're off the air, make sure to tune into the podcast. If you're watching the evening news, they talk about the podcast, things like that. And it's literally because they realize whenever people go into their cubicle, they can't have a radio anymore. They can't go online and listen, but they can listen on their mobile device. They can turn on their phone, and while they're working in their cubicle, be listening to a podcast, things like that. We've stolen a lot of their audience and their listenership. We have gotten to the point of like Cheers, where people schedule it into their life. They knew that 8 p.m. on a Thursday night, they could go to NBC and catch Cheers. People know that they can come on Tuesday night and catch my show live at 8 p.m. They schedule, I'm sure people in your industry schedule your show into their schedule.
Sure. And then when they can't, they have the opportunity to click on a button, download it, and then use it. Or listen to it whenever they need. So I think kind of as podcasters, part of our work is to think about, or part of our approach needs to be think, what is the environment in which people will be consuming this content? And how will they be accessing it? I.e., will it be online or will it be offline, downloaded previously? And that downloaded previously offline is, I need to encourage people to click on that button, save for later.
Yep.
And I think we tend to miss that. I certainly do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, of course, the concept of call to action in shows, things like that, is so entirely important. And that once again is part of that, just looping it right back. Right, it goes right back to the building of community. And the fact of when you ask your community to move, they move. And there are so many broadcasters out there that I give the example of, like Rush Limbaugh was a prime example here in America, where, hey, he had the Limbaugh letter years ago, where you paid like $5 a month and you got like a literal newsletter mailed to your house. things like that. Like, he mastered the concept of giving the listeners what they wanted outside of the radio show and how to monetize a mailing list, how to give people that content and serve it up in another way that still kept them interested when they weren't near the radio. And it's so important to build that community of trust, to build that community that moves when you say, go check this out. They move to go check it out, Right. And that only comes from social media, from being there, being visible, like we were saying, kind of controlling that niche of your market.
Right, yeah, and that does come back to not kowtowing, as it were, to the keywords mantra, not saying, I need to stuff all the keywords I possibly can into my title and my description so that Google will like me. It's, who am I, what do I do, and who are my audience? And I need to stay true to that. And the keywords aspect is vocabulary. I need to use the vocabulary that my audience would use or does use. Yeah. And at that point, there's an intersection. And at that point, Google, Twitter, Facebook, the podcast platforms, all of these machines can recommend me because they understand who my audience is, because we share the same values, the same vocabulary, and because they're hanging out in the general corner of the internet where I exist. So I really would say kind of figure out who you are, what you're doing, who your audience is going to be, and make sure that you're very clear about that and that you don't get tempted by these kind of get-rich-quick great keywords, different audience. I can move over to this new audience and suddenly make a big splash. If you can get the core audience right, you can build out little by little, and I think that's the secret.
That's just it. It's a slow and steady process. Yeah. And once again, the jazz hands moment for my presentation would be time or money. Time or money. If you got the money, you can definitely pay an SEO person to go out there, and your discoverability will shoot up, all kinds of stuff, and you'll be paying them regularly. Or if you have the time, you can put out content after content after content of the same quality, of the same type of description, using the same type of vocabulary, talking to the audience in the same organic way. And that will literally become a search type in Google after a certain amount of time.
Which is a brilliant point, because in fact we can influence Google by creating demand, by saying, here is the vocabulary, and encouraging people to search around that vocabulary. You will create the search, even though it's very small, and Google will understand it. Google is massive, and I think we tend to forget that. And it's quite easy, if you look at the bottom of the Google results for related searches, you will see that you don't need to generate large amounts of search volume for a related search for it to appear. And you're now looking at the Jason Barnard, My Brand SERP. If you scroll to the bottom, we can actually look at that. Jason Barnard LinkedIn, Jason Barnard Podcast, Veronique Jason Barnard Boowa. What it's done here is associated me with things that people search for. Now, Jason Barnard Boowa is a cartoon character I created 20 years ago.
That's how deep this can go.
Yeah, and there isn't a vast amount of search volume around that. But it understands, because there is some. And it now suggests that as a teachable moment, as we were saying earlier on, an opportunity for its user, once they've searched for Jason Barnard, it's saying, maybe you want to look for Jason Barnard Boowa. It's a suggestion. But then if you think about that in a wider sense, if somebody types Boowa, the blue dog from the cartoon I created, the related searches could potentially be Boowa, Jason Barnard, and somebody would then come and find me. The other way around. Yeah. Which is a delightful idea, and if you push it out even further, which is maybe not, not short term, definitely not short term, is if somebody starts searching for digital marketing podcasts, and I have managed to get Jason Barnard digital marketing podcasts in my related searches. Potentially there is that connection, and that connection could work the other way around.
Yep.
That would be very long term, but it's certainly something I could hope to achieve over 5, 6, 7 years.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And that's where really it comes down to, I remember one of the first articles I read, because I tend to do a lot of rabbit hole research before I get into a project, and before I started my beloved Talking Sound podcast, which you were on, I remember doing months of research, and one of the best articles that I referred to all the time was literally titled, "So You Want to Start a Podcast, Be Ready to Be Lonely." And it was just the idea of, it's going to take a while for people to find you. So you've got to have the stick-to-itiveness of getting to 50 episodes, 100 episodes, and just to give you an idea, folks, if you're releasing once a week, that's 2 years. That's 2 years of doing something. And you're looking at, for an hour-long show with proper social media promotion, everything else, probably about 5 hours a week of work a week per episode, maybe
so
10.
We just calculate that for 100 episodes, that's 500 hours of work over 2 years. You have to be prepared to put that in. And I think if I understand correctly, like 95% of podcasts don't get past the fifth episode. I don't know what the percentage is, but it's something shocking like that.
It is something close to 70% that are out there that are nowhere beyond 20 episodes. I know that there is one platform that I don't necessarily speak of by name on the show, but a lot of people use it. And like I want to say 75% of the shows on that platform are defunct shows that have no content. They went to 10 episodes and they're gone. And you have to remember, folks, you're sharing your SEO discoverability with dead shows. If you don't have your own website, if you don't have your own URL that's pushing that out, you're now being dragged down by that dead SEO that's not going anywhere, that's not being built, and
There are actually 2 points there, one of which is, if I have a site of my own where I'm pushing my content out, I don't care if those platforms live or die.
Darn tootin'.
There are 30 different platforms. It doesn't matter to me anymore.
That's
because people can always come to my site. So if I was on a platform and they were used to listening to me on a platform, for example, Podchaser, and Podchaser collapses for whatever reason, people will then know to search for Jason Barnard podcast and come to my site, which is brilliant. And it gives me power. It's my front lawn, as you were saying earlier.
That's right.
Once again, phenomenally important and vastly underrated. And the second point that you made there that I would really like to pick up on is my podcast is in the top 10%. But it isn't in the top 10% because it's one of the best podcasts that's listened to by millions of people. It's in the top 10% because 90% of podcasts collapse after 10 to 20 episodes.
That's right.
So it's no glory to me, but actually just keeping going for 180 episodes, which is what I've done, gets me in the top 10% right off the bat.
That's right. That's right.
Not right off the bat, excuse me. After 3 years, it gets me in the top 10%. But the fact of just being there and keeping producing immediately puts you in the top 10%.
Yeah, precisely, because you are continually serving up those platters of information to Google. They know every Tuesday they can come by your site for a similar snack.
That's a really important point that I'd almost forgotten to make, is part of the podcast. I mean, my podcast, I'm not actually doing it because I think I only get gazillions of listeners. I'm doing it for 2 reasons. One of which is I invite guests who can teach me things that I didn't already know. So I ask them questions and they explain to me things that I didn't previously understand. So it's a vast learning experience. And honestly, in the last 3 years I've been doing this podcast, I have learned 100 times more than in the 10 years before.
Yes.
Without the podcast.
Yeah.
That's point number one. And point number 2 is it's an experiment with a company called WordLift, who are an Italian company who do very complex SEO stuff. It's incredibly interesting. But the point was we were trying to get Google to understand what the podcast is, who we've invited, what the topics are, so that we can potentially be pushed out onto Google Discover and get this extra visibility in Google from the fact that Google fully understands who we are, what we do, and who our audience is. And so far, it's gone incredibly well. And I'm enjoying the experiment a great deal. I think podcasts, in terms of Google at least, Google's putting a lot of effort into it.
They are.
And it's definitely something that's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger in Google's mind. And when you think about Google, when it decides to make something work, when it decides to make something popular, it will.
Yeah. Yeah, prime example, look at what happened after they saw the potential of YouTube and picked them up. They are now the second largest search engine.
Sure.
Like if you aren't on YouTube as a podcaster, there are 100 different ways. I'm getting ready to do an episode on how to use the software I'm using right now to put a still image with your podcast on YouTube, whatever. But if you are on YouTube in some way, shape, or form, you are doing yourself a huge disservice, even if it's just audio with a still picture. It is one of the largest search engines out there.
Which is a really interesting point, because, in fact, my podcast garners vastly more listeners and viewers on YouTube than it does from Google directly. Google directly is starting to move forwards, but I wouldn't focus on that. I would agree with you, and that's a really good point, is YouTube's a really good place to push your podcast, to get some extra viewers.
Yep.
I mean, some of them have got 50, 60 views.
Yeah.
50 or 60 views is still 50 or 60 views.
That's right.
I wouldn't have got otherwise.
Well, and you may not think of it in a lot, but hey, think of it this way, folks. Imagine you invited some folks over for a barbecue one Saturday and 50 people showed up.
Oh.
All right. Imagine you put word out to like 10 people. Come on by, man. We'll make some burgers, pop some fireworks, whatnot. And 50 people showed up. How would you react then?
Oh, I've got a good story for that, because I did exactly that. I play in a band with a friend of mine,
yep.
And I had a flat in the south of France with a garage, and I said to people, I said to the singer, let's have a concert in my garage. And we opened the garage up, and we told 10 people in the afternoon from the village, come along. And we had literally 50 people turn up.
Yeah.
And by the third garage party, we were calling it, we had 200 people in my tiny garage jumping up and down to the music we were playing.
Wow.
And it is true,
Yeah.
And that's the lawn thing again. Come to my lawn.
That's it.
I get 200 people. If I say go to the bar next door, I get 5 people and a dog who's not even interested in the music.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I worked in music for years, and that is 100% it. Because it's like bands who play every Friday night or bands that play once a month. That once a month, it's an event. You have time to plan it and put it into your schedule. If it's out every Friday, then everybody has the mentality of like, well, I'll go next Friday.
Yeah.
I got too much going on this week. I'll hit it up next week. There's always too much going on. But when you, once again, to bring it back home to podcasts, it's about serving up that information in the same way, in the same time frame all the time, to let not only Google, but your listeners know where to come for the party. Literally, where to come for the party.
Yeah, well, there are 2 things. One of which is I actually have an event online which is called Cali Cube Tuesdays. And when I invite guests, sometimes it's like, oh, can we do it on a Wednesday? And you go, well, no, it's called Cali Cube Tuesdays. Which bit of that don't you understand? Which has always made me giggle, but... And it's working incredibly well. That Cali Cube Tuesdays, every Tuesday. And one nice thing I like about it is I do it live. So even if I'm not in a good mood or I'm tired on a Tuesday, I still have to do it. And it's always good because I push myself through. The adrenaline gets running. I do the hour show and it's fine. And none of them are bad. However bad I feel, you can actually hear it. If I was ill before, which has been the case in a few of the times. And the other thing is the Boo and Koala we were talking about earlier on, the Boo the blue dog. It was a website. And we said to our audience, which started off as like 5 people who were our neighbours and friends, every first of the month we will update the website with 3 games, 1 song and 1 activity, 1 manual activity for kids. And over 10 years we went from 5 people who are all my neighbours to 5 million people a month. By being regular, we never, ever missed a first of the month for 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's just it. That consistency is so important. Once again, if it was like growing up knowing every Thursday night Cheers was on. You scheduled it into your life. It gives you an opportunity to look forward to it. And in this day and age of especially binging the way that things are now, I think building some of that anticipation in the world and in life is a little bit important again. And I think that we, as podcasters, need to appreciate the anticipation of where things will be. Like you said, having that long play mentality of, if I'm doing this, I'm doing it for 200-300 episodes. I'm doing it for a couple of years, you know. I'm sure you have the same mentality as I do as a musician. I'm not getting into any band or project that I am not willing to put myself wholeheartedly into. Sure.
No, 100%. And some people say to me, oh, come and play a bit of music here. And I mean, I'll go and jam with people for music. I'll do podcast, the equivalent of podcast guesting. But if I'm going to put my name on something as a project and say this is my project, I have to have the fundamental belief in my own mind that it's going to last, it's going to be something important and valuable and helpful to my audience, whoever that audience may be. And once again, coming back to Boo and Koala, when you look at that, one of the reasons it worked is because we were regular. Every first of the month, the quality was always there. And every single month, the content absolutely stuck to the core values of what we were building, which is quality, helpful, educational content for kids aged up to 10 years old.
Well, and, you know, that's an important thing to bring up that I bring up a lot in my presentation before I let you go real quick, is just the idea of brand consistency, the idea of having a mission statement, having like a 2-sentence mission statement that if you need to know whether or not to book this guest, if that guest or what they're there for or the book that they're bringing on or whatever cannot be shoehorned into that 2-sentence, like just as a former broadcast producer, that's the thing. If it can't be shoehorned into that 2-sentence description of what you are, what you are about, and what your content serves up, don't do it. Don't do it. You are disobeying your brand. You're disobeying your loyal audience and the content that they are looking to you for, and you're totally jacking up your SEO by tying it to other things that are totally unrelated.
Brilliant. No, actually, to be honest with you, you said you're going to let me go, and I think that is possibly the best conclusion to this podcast anybody could have come up with. And to be honest, hats off to you, Christopher, because I couldn't have said it that well.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I love the fact that you come on. The whole reason why, like you said, with your show and the Tuesdays that you're doing with CaliCube Tuesdays, the whole idea is for you to learn too. I learn from this process every day. Even the audience that I taught yesterday, even today. The whole reason I wanted to have you on again was like, that first episode was amazing, and I loved it, and I've listened to it 2 or 3 times, but even today, I have whole new concepts that I need to implement because of it. And that's what it's about, is us learning, us exploring together as a community and building each other up. And I want to thank you so much for your time with our audience today.
And I want to thank you for the great questions because, as you said, I'm learning. You asked me a question, I think, well, I hadn't thought of that. I think about it as we're talking, and I find new things that I hadn't thought of before. And I think kind of sometimes one might imagine when I'm talking, I've thought of all this before. And a lot of what we just talked about, I haven't actually thought through or articulated before. And I'm going to have to listen back to this because I've got things to learn from both what you said and the questions that you asked that brought me to say things that I hadn't previously thought through or said.
Oh, thank you so much. That means the world to me. Before we do let you go, tell everybody one last time where they can go to find everything from CaliCube, where they can go to find the free tools that you guys have, all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm a big fan of people searching my name, Jason Barnard, or searching CaliCube, because the more brand searches you get, the more Google understands that your audience is interested in you, and the better you will perform in general. So search for my name, Jason Barnard, search for my company, CaliCube, and by doing so, and then choosing, because when you search for those names, the information that comes up on Google is something that I optimize to make sure that it is helpful and valuable to my audience. By searching for those names, Jason Barnard and CaliCube, you will see my Google business card, and Google will understand that my audience, or an audience that is relevant to me, is interested in me and my company. And I would advise anybody who has a podcast to push that same idea, because it will pay dividends over time.
That's right. Thank you once again so much. Such incredible information to get from you, Jason, that any podcaster out there can use and should be using. If you are not leveraging that, you are doing yourself a disservice. Please do hold the line while we close things out, Jason.
Brilliant.
While you are online checking out all the great work of Jason Barnard, checking out all the fantastic tools that you can use over at calicube.pro, make sure to stop on by the Talking Sound podcast. You can sign up and get your free 5-point podcast success checklist, as well as all the episodes dumped in your mailbox, all kinds of good stuff. Stop on by, check us out. While you're there, make sure to stop on by our sponsor, True Hemp Science. True Hemp Science is located right here in Austin, Texas. They are the home of some of the best spigyrically made CBD oil out there. I use it myself. My doctor prescribed me CBD a few years ago during my travels as supplemental for my anxiety. I use their stuff. Make sure to stop on by. Use the code CADET7 to get 7% off your entire purchase on the way out. You can also sign up and get 2 free, count them, 2 edibles on your way out the door. Once again, that code is CADET20. Take care of yourselves, everybody. Take care of each other. Make sure that when you're podcasting that, you're keeping your security in mind. We're going to be having a whole episode coming up soon with Todd Cochran of Blueberry Podcasting, talking about listener security, securing your listeners' information, things like that. So until next time, take care of yourselves. We'll talk to you soon. Keep hitting record, everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Podcast Cadet Training Series. For more episodes and information, follow us online at podcastcadet.com and all major podcast platforms. Join our Podcast Cadet community group on Facebook for the latest in podcast industry news and conversation with industry professionals. The Podcast Cadet Training Series is produced in association with HC Productions and the HC Universal Network of Podcasts. For more great episodes and content, or for information about distribution or sponsoring podcasts, visit hcuniversalnetwork.com today. Thanks for listening, and until next time, remember to press record.